old saying that good things always come in pairs. I'm having to reshoot this video because I noticed in the last one, right about there was a piece of paper that had some private information on it. Whoops. You may have noticed in my previous computer video I edited that out, but in this one it was a little bit too intrusive. So I'm having to, of course, reshoot the video of this Hewlett-Packard Vectra 486/66U. That's a blessing in disguise. The video didn't really come out the way that I was really hoping that it would. So in this video we're going to be taking a more in-depth look at the system, and hopefully I'll manage to touch on the subjects that I intended to broach along the way. Unfortunately, that does mean that you are going to miss out on the installation of operating systems on this video, but really... Okay, we'll go ahead and turn that fan off. That wasn't a very nice noise that made when I turned it off. But anyway... I lost my entire train of thought. That's wonderful. Stupid fan. Oh, right. The operating system installation really didn't go as well as it should because apparently my floppy diskettes are failing at a rapid rate. I don't know if that's the floppy drive in here having problems or what I should attribute it to, but I'm really willing to bet that it's the floppy diskettes that are failing after all these years. You will see that the system is very dirty and I have not cleaned it up. I'm going to have to get right down to that. Of course, I'm going to have to get some goo gone first. As you might guess, this thing bases itself on an Intel 486, and you may be able to guess that it's 66 megahertz from that as well. You'd be correct. It bases itself on a 486 DX266, and what that means is that it is actually a 33 megahertz part, but that it has been clock doubled. That was a big thing back in the day, you know, get it some additional performance for some money out of, you know, stock parts. 486, 36 megahertz DX part, clock doubled from the factory to 66 megahertz. It was a good way to get some added performance out of it. Of course, Intel took that way too far with the Pentium 4. We all know what a disaster that was. We see aforementioned floppy diskette drive. There are two 5¼ inch expansion bays. This isn't really expansion at all, it's just the front panel. You can see a hardware power switch. That used to be common back in the AT days. Really wish it was still around. It was very handy, you know, if your computer was misbehaving or if you were just feeling ornery, push the power switch and the whole thing just turns right off. It's very nice when you're feeling ornery and wanted to show the computer who's boss. Anyway, I'm not really sure what this switch here does. Maybe somebody could shed some light on it. If you can't read it, which maybe you might not be able to, but there is a, well, you won't be able to read it now, the focus is going crazy. It's a line with a no symbol going through it, and there's some dots above it as well, and one below it, below the end there. I don't really know what that means. Maybe it's a turbo switch? That was another common thing back in the days of these, because you used to have old software that wouldn't really run very well when you're trying to run it at 66 megahertz. If it was designed for a system like an XT that runs at 4.77 or 8, or even something that runs at 33, you'd find that it runs way too fast. That's what the turbo button was for. That might be a turbo switch, but I am not sure on that one. Hard drive lights there. There's a reset switch here, which is something that is unfortunately disappearing. You can see ready to run Microsoft Windows. This machine, if you didn't see the last video, did end up suffering a little bit of a fall, and that's rather much splayed the case out. It's too bad it happened to this machine and it didn't happen to something that was less interesting to me, but oh well, it still functions, I suppose. There used to be a latch there, and that's missing. So we'll go ahead and we'll flip the machine around so we can take a look at the port arrangement. I was going to remove it, but I still have the HP IB card here that interfaces with the 7673 controller and numerous other things. It's a GPIB card. I forget what that stands for. I should probably know this off the top of my head, but I think it's General Purpose Interface Board. I've always just called it GPIB or GPIB. Usually I call it GPIB. And there are 4 other slots here. If you don't already know the secret that this system is holding and what makes this thing actually quite valuable, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at that here in a minute. You can see some more cracking there. There's a cooling fan behind this, VGA, twin DB9 serial ports, parallel port, a BIOS lock switch, the purpose of which I'm not entirely sure of, and of course PS2 keyboard and mouse. Here we got some information. Part number, what is that? D2286B. There's your serial number. Made in USA. We don't have a date, unfortunately, but it doesn't really matter that much, I suppose. Vectra 48666U. There's our inputs, certifications, part 15. There's a key lock here. Ooh, Nordic grounding statement. Of course, it's written in Nordic, so I can't really read it. Somebody who can certainly go ahead and translate that if you so desire. I don't have the keys for this system, so fortunately that is in the unlocked position. I believe that's it. So there is, looks like a warranty sticker on the side here. If you want to read that, you can go ahead and pause the video. If I turn the video light off, you might be able to read it a little better. So now the focus is unhappy about it. Anyway, let me pop the top cover and we'll go ahead and see what kind of secrets the system is harboring. Check out the size of this power supply. It really is. It spans the whole length of the case. Go ahead and turn it around here. And almost the entire depth, well, half of the depth, you can see there. That's how big the power supply in this thing is, and there's some removal instructions. Unfortunately, this did take some damage. This little peg here broke. There should be a piece that goes over top of it, and that's gone. This peg here also broke. Fortunately, the two latches are in place. I don't know what happened to this one, but somebody completely mutilated this. And I bent it back. You can see it's obviously not perfect, but at least the latch works. I believe this front piece here is part of the power supply as well. Actually, no, it probably wouldn't be, because that would defeat the instructions here. But anyway, so there's the power supply. Here you can see all the RAM. I believe these are 72-pin SIMs. They might be 30, but I'm pretty sure they're 72. It definitely looks like they're 72 based on the size of the contacts, which you can't really see. Well, now you can. Anyway, there's 16 megabytes all told across these. There's some more supporting logic here. You see, this is from back in a time when there really wasn't a lot of integration. So you can see there's lots of circuitry around here. You can really get an idea as to what a circuit does just by looking at it. Then again, having said that, there is definitely a lot of integration here because, well, this is from the... I'm not really sure how old this machine would be. I mean, my guess would be that, oh, look at that. I see some word. Oh, that's some instructions on how to set the dip, that bank of dip switches back there. There's some wording here. It says 486DX, enable secondary, and speed 33 megahertz. It looks like all of those are, I can't tell if they're all on or if they're all off. I do know this thing does have a 486DX266. There is an interposer board beside that, beside the heatsink, that you may or may not be able to see. Probably not. Well, just you can see the heatsink there. There's an interposer board beside that. And I'm not sure what's on that interposer board, but nevertheless, there's some more dip switches back there. Here's the hard drive cage. I did have to supply my own hard drive. There's a Western Digital Caviar 1.6 gigabyte, 1.6 gigabyte drive in there. I don't know if this cable is installed correctly or not, but you can see there's one IDE end here. There's one hooked up to the hard drive, but it looks like the middle one is actually hooked into the board. There is only one IDE connection here. I'm trying to look at some of these here. I'm getting a... I wonder... Looks like the floppy connector is larger. Huh, that's interesting. Probably should have looked at that before I installed all of this, but you get floppy disk. Maybe there's a secondary IDE controller in here? I don't know. I don't think so. I would think that there'd only be one. Anyway, so there you can see the fan at the back, which fortunately is still installed and intact. Now you get to the fun part. There are some, I don't know what they call those. I think they call those zip sockets, presumably for expanding the video memory. I should really remove this clock battery. If you find yourself in possession of a 486, 386, or really anything older than, I think even some Pentium systems use these 3.6 volt lithium, I guess they're not lithium actually, they're more like NiCad battery. They used to recharge when the system was turned on, but now of course they're dead, and they have the unfortunate tendency to leak and destroy motherboards. So you should really remove those if you can at all do so. It's got a case-mounted speaker. Yeah, that's something real exciting, isn't it? And have a look at these. These are EISA slots, for those of you that do not know. There are 5 of them. EISA was the planned successor to ISA before PCI really took off. There were a lot of them. Microchannel, EISA, Opti, Visa, Local Bus. I should really brush up on my history on this, but I do know that EISA was an advancement in the ability to automatically configure your expansion cards. I wonder if this is a regular ISA card or if this is EISA. I presume this is actually, you know, let me pull that card and have a look at it. That may even be an 8-bit ISA card. One of the unfortunate things about HP computers, and compact machines as well, is their unfortunate tendency to use Torx-headed screws. I mean, sure, this has a flat blade indentation in it, but that's really just annoying. Anyway, yes, this is in fact an 8-bit ISA card. You can tell because it doesn't have, it's only got one set of connectors here. Okay, like I said, it is always good to, you know, research things before you go spouting about them on the internet. Because there'll no doubt be somebody who will come along and will tell you in no uncertain terms that you are wrong. And indeed, I was wrong about one very important thing. You see, I was not aware that EISA basically implied 32-bit. I always thought that it was like ISA and that it was limited to 16-bit only. Although, that's not true. These are, in fact, 32-bit EISA slots, and EISA slots in general are 32-bit. There is no such thing as a 16-bit EISA card, nor is there such thing as an 8-bit EISA card. However, because EISA, or the pins on EISA cards, are a superset, or a subset, I forget what the right word is, I think it's a superset of ISA, the two are backwards compatible, and that is why this 8-bit ISA card works in here. Also, these slots, although they are 32-bit, they're still clocked at 8 megahertz, so, again, these cards work just fine. Anyway, I believe this is actually the BIOS chip right here. You know, I'll turn the camera light off, because it's, well, that didn't really help at all. It's still overexposed. There we go. You can see a copyright date of 1992, so that tells us when this machine was made, roughly. P0402 is the BIOS revision that this machine is running, and you can see it says ROM right there, so that's probably the system's basic input-output system, at least the ROM portion of it. Most ISA cards, this one is seemingly an exception, because I don't see any on it. Oh yeah, there we go. Most of them had a set of jumpers, or dip switches, or whatnot, and those are used to configure, you know, various settings, like IRQs, actually, IRQ and interrupts the same thing. IRQs, ports, and addresses, and whatnot. And that was required because ISA is not a plug-and-play interface. You see, you young whippersnappers these days, you really have things easy. Back in the day of this thing, well, plug-and-play was more like plug-and-pray, as in you plug something in and pray that it actually works. You had to know all of these settings in order to avoid having conflicts between cards and memory addresses and all of that. It really was a different time. You had to know what you were doing. EISA threw that all away and instead switched over to a configuration by software method, whereby you had an EISA configuration utility and you had configuration files. And in order to maintain backwards compatibility, there were generic or specific, such as the case may be, EISA configuration cards for these ISA boards. And what they did is they, described how to set up the jumpers and all the dip switches and whatnot so that you had, the correct settings and all of that. And they also had those so that the system knew that there was an ISA card and an EISA slot. Because that was one of the big things. It had to know what was in each slot in order to make the configuration, well, easy. Or even possible, for that matter. Unfortunately, the majority of manufacturers of ISA cards really didn't care about EISA, so they didn't issue configuration files for the EISA cards. Something else you won't really see anymore, you see external video. Even though it's not populated, I believe what that would have been used for is for video overlay. I think that was part of the VISA standard. But what the video overlay would do is if you had, say, for example, and this is the best example that comes to mind, an external MPEG decoder, because, let's face it, you wouldn't really be decoding MPEG on a 486, not even a clock-doubled 486 like this. Hell, even a clock-quadrupled, or rather clock-tripled 486 would not be able to do hardware decoding very well. MPEG decoding. So you'd have external hardware decoders, and they'd spit back the processed video as a video overlay, which would go over that connector and would be blended with the signal that came from the video chipset and the RAM DAC and all of that fancy stuff. But that's really outside of the scope of this video, and at nearly 3:15 in the morning, I'm not really going to get into too much of the technical aspect of that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm curious about something. I'm going to remove this here for a second, and I want to see what all is behind. There we can see the hard drive. What is this? Is this actually a floppy drive connector? Yes, it is. So this is actually kind of proprietary. So if you lose this or this fails, well, you're kind of screwed, sucker. It looks like... No, that's not possible. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if this is even a standard floppy drive. I think it is. That's very interesting, the way this cable is set up. But anyway, yeah, this is probably just a standard floppy drive, and just the cable is, a little bit interesting. It looks like this is a 3-drive cable. So that's probably how they managed to set this up. That's why there are these two. They expect that you'll put two 5¼ floppy drives in here. Of course, I don't think very many people did that. Most people probably put a CD-ROM, and I'm thinking about putting a CD-ROM in here. I've got one in a Zenith 486 that's probably not really going to work again for the foreseeable future. So another thing that you won't really see is the fact that these slot blanks are screwed into the case. Most manufacturers are cheap these days, and they just have little plastic pegs that break off the second you look at them the wrong way. Anyway, I think that's enough blither blather about this. Let's go ahead and actually fire the thing up and see it work. So I bet you're just dying to see that. Okay, let's go ahead and fire it up. Now I think I'm going to have to get the EISA configuration utility. By the way, the only reason why I'm able to make this video is because of YouTube user NJ Roadfan. I would like to give him big thanks for getting me the disk images for the EISA configuration utility for this system. Of course, I could have got them myself, at least theoretically, if I could connect to HP's FTP website. I don't know what's wrong with it. It's supposed to be publicly accessible, but FileZilla's been having none of it of late, so whatever. Let's go ahead and fire it up. Turn the camera light off, I don't really need that. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to plug in all the peripherals. Oops. So let me go do that. I tell you what, I am the world's biggest doof sometimes, and it always seems to happen when it's on video, too. I also went ahead and got a mouse. How funny that it's a compact mouse. Back when the thing would have been made, compact would have been the competition. So we'll go ahead and we'll try that again. set our KVM switch correctly this time. And we'll see if it's actually working. Yes, it sure is. Onboard VGA, 512K of video memory. Wow, that sure is a lot of video memory. It's counting up the system memory. All 16 megs of it, although it only counts up to 15. Not 16. I suppose there's a setting I could actually change for that to count up everything. Floppy drive it sees. Huh. It actually retained the CMOS settings. That's strange. So we're booting into DOS. This is DOS 6.22. Got some serious fun with this because my second DOS disk went bad. So I had to remake that. And of course it figures, you know, I would only notice this after a file fails to transfer, so there is that, I suppose. If we do a directory listing, we should see that there is some other stuff on here. Actually, quite a fair amount of other stuff. We got Windows. Some HP folders. We'll take a look at that in a minute. Windows was also fun. I found that my first Windows disk had gone bad. And general failure started reading drive A. And you know, when general failure starts reading your stuff, there's a big problem. So, type in Win to start Windows. And we can see it's running Windows 3.1. Probably didn't hear that, because this system is one of those lovely systems that blocks out the PC speaker with the front panel. But I have the PC speaker sound driver installed in this. Remember that? Yeah, that's a forgotten thing. Anyway, we've got HP New Wave installed. That is the other, that's what all those HP directories are for. It's been a while since I used this, so we're not really going to have a look at it in this video. I may take a look at it in depth in another video, but I just thought it was interesting considering this was an HP computer. I thought I might as well install, you know, something from HP. This would have been released around the same time in the system anyway. Copyright 92. So anyway, we'll get rid of that. Yes, I want to close it. There really isn't much else that I can think of to demonstrate. There's not really anything on the system. We are going to give it a little bit of color, though. I think I'm probably the only person on the planet who would ever seriously consider using their computer with the color scheme set to that. Okay, that's more of a joke than anything else. We're going to go ahead and we'll set it to something else. But, you know, I did have a computer I did set to this back in... Well, I wouldn't have been the day when it would have been new, but back when I had a Windows 3.1 machine and I was using it on a regular basis. Unfortunately, we're only running the generic VGA drivers. I have not been able to get the SVGA drivers to work on anything. There's another really funny one. I have used this before too, but let's choose something that's a little bit... Actually, we're running this on an LCD. Let's change it to one of the LCD standards. Does that sound good? I think so. There we go. There's some color and flair added to Windows 3.1. So here's some basic information about it. Nothing really too fancy. Originally when I installed it, I found out that I forgot to install it with a mouse, so I didn't have to install a mouse. It wasn't too difficult. There really isn't too much on this system. I probably should have put some other stuff to really extend the video. I could play some solitaire, but doing it with one hand is not really fun. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I can't think of much else to say. So we're going to go ahead and shut the machine down and conclude the video. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. And this is CP666 signing off. Hope to see you next time. We'll probably take a look at the EISA configuration utility, and then we'll probably also take a look at HP New Wave, likely in their own separate videos, but stay tuned for those in the future. Till then, guys, that is it for this video. Oh, yes, I wanted to see what this did. like a whole lot of nothing. Let's go ahead and start Windows back up then. Yeah, you're getting a little bit of an extended video. WIN for Windows. This is really inconvenient. I should really get another monitor and another keyboard and a mouse so I don't have to use them. Oh, the beat pattern changes. I wonder if that is a system speaker test button. I don't think so, because it's got a light. Maybe it's a system speaker mute button? Yeah, that actually probably is it. These dashes could represent, you know, beat code, and there's a no symbol through it. So that probably is a system speaker mute button. Doesn't really matter, and like I said, this is the one nice thing about vintage computers. You can just flick a switch, and the whole thing turns right off just like that. Of course, you got to be careful. If your system is significantly old enough, you'll have to make sure to park your hard drive heads before doing that. But that is outside of the scope of this video because the system does not require it.